Hello, I'm Ken Arscott, your narrator for this training video. Most sexual harassment complaints are from women against men, which are most of the examples that we'll be using throughout this training session. We don't want to overlook the fact that sexual harassment is sometimes made by men against women and also in same-sex situations. President Bush stated in his State of the Union speech, "Respect for women is one of the non-negotiable demands of human dignity." Remember this when you think about your verbal or body language towards a member of the opposite sex. It's important that you know that sexual harassment can have a serious negative and sometimes devastating impact on the victims, their families, and associates. When sexual harassment occurs in the workplace, it can have an upsetting effect on other employees. When someone is sexually harassed, their work performance also declines. As a result, your company could lose a contract which could force them to lay people off. It takes a long time to overcome the disgrace for the company. Not to mention that once accused of sexual harassment, the person will have a difficult, if not impossible time, turning around the reputation of a sexual harasser. This in turn can affect future employment and friendships. There are several definitions for sexual harassment, but the one that covers it clearly is any sexual advances, like touching or grabbing, or sexual comments that are sexual, offensive, and/or telling sexual jokes that are not wanted or inappropriate. Another way to look at this is sexual harassment is a type of sexual discrimination towards a person of the opposite gender or a person of the same gender. The key here is that sexual harassment exists when the sexual conduct is unwelcomed. The component that defines sexual harassment is that the person is being sexually harassed by a supervisor who has control or limited control over them. A security supervisor can sexually harass a subordinate security officer. Therefore, you would think that sexual harassment could not apply to you when on duty. Actually, the opposite's true. As a security officer, you may not actually supervise anyone, but you do have a certain amount of authority, and therefore that puts you at risk. A large portion of your duties is protecting property, which in turn gives you the authority to prevent people from entering buildings or certain areas. This authority can be considered supervision by the courts. For example, you're assigned to check IDs at an office building, and you make a sexual advancement towards someone. Your supervision is derived from the fact that you could deny them access. So if that person objects, it could be considered sexual harassment. In addition, if the offense was physical, you could be subject to a criminal charge such as indecent assault. Regardless if the sexual harassment was physical or verbal, at the minimum, you'd be subject to a civil or administrative action. Therefore, it's imperative that you always conduct yourself in a professional manner to prevent even any suggestion of improper actions. Remember, your reputation and future depends on your actions. Sexualized environment. You should be especially cautious if you work in a workplace where cursing is common. In this type of environment, women are 3 times likely to be treated as sex objects. Remember, just because others are telling sexual jokes or making lewd remarks to the women, it doesn't give you the right to do the same thing. If this occurs, ask the men who make these vulgar and sexual harassment remarks to stop.
You sure got a sexy walk, girl.
Knock it off.
Come on, I was just kidding.
Sure.
Telling them that they don't appreciate or want to hear these remarks and ask them not to continue. These will strengthen any accusations of sexual harassment that are made, and remember, forewarned weakens defense. Types of sexual harassment. Sexual harassing behavior involves a range of conduct from minor offensive words or acts to forced sexual advances, which can include rape. For example, a single sexual advance may be enough to show sexual harassment. If it is connected to issuing or denying a visitor's pass, denying or allowing access to a building. There are more, but you get the idea. Sexist words. Calling a woman baby. sugar, or babe, to name a few, are just considered sexual harassments even if the woman doesn't object to them. Another use of words and phrases that fall into this category: dumb blonde. Women cry more. Women should be kept barefoot and pregnant. On the flip side of that is when a female security officer tells a customer, "Try thinking above your belt buckle." Again, there are more, but you get the idea. Sexist behavior. Another area that you should avoid is sexist behavior. Several of these behavioral patterns can be committed by a male or a female security officer. A few examples are things such as leering and looking up and down a person's body, cornering a person or blocking a person from passing, following a person without a valid reason, intentionally standing too close or brushing against a person, looking up a woman's skirt or down a woman's blouse, pulling a person onto your lap, or touching a person's body, clothes, or hair, hugging, kissing, or stroking, touching or rubbing yourself sexually around another person, making sexual gestures with your hands or body movements. Sexual questions. Asking a person to have sex is sexual harassment, especially when it's clear that the victim is not interested. Even insinuating that you want to have sex with a person is harassment. The insult is unwelcome. Sexual advances. Sexual advances can be made towards one or more than one person. For example, turning a conversation towards sexual topics in a mixed group, telling dirty jokes or stories in a mixed group, telling a person about your sexual fantasies, sexual experiences, and sexual preferences, making sexual comments or insinuations, asking about a person's sexual life, making sexual comments regarding a person's clothes, body, or looks, repeatedly asking a person for a date that's not interested, making sexual harassing telephone calls, or sending them sexual-related emails and text messages. This would include sexual jokes and erotic stories and pictures. Sexual intimidation. This type of coercion is usually made by a supervisor or a manager requesting sexual favors for a promotion or a transfer. It also can be done by security officers that have control of access or other authority over the public and customers, such as an office building, a shopping center, parking garages, sporting events, things of that nature. Sexual criminal conduct. There are some sexual harassments that are beyond civil, which is considered criminal. These would include, but they're not limited to, threats to get sex, forced sexual touching. This constitutes assault, even if it could not be proven that it was sexual. Attempted or actual sexual assault. Any of these, whether attempted or completed, would be considered sexual assault, and in some states, the offender would be documented as a sexual offender. Sexual harassment policy. Most security company sexual harassment policies clearly state sexual harassment of any kind will not be tolerated by or towards any manager, supervisor, security officer, customer, contractor, or anyone else that does business with the company. To clarify this, let me go over some of the important and typical topics that are usually included in the policy employees are required to agree to as a condition of their employment. Let's start with an overview. Policy. It's the policy of the company to provide a positive, discrimination-free environment. This discrimination-free policy shall include sexual harassment. Sexual harassment at the company's facility or at a client's facility is unacceptable conduct, and it's subject to discipline up to and including termination from the company. Sexual harassment is defined for this policy as either unwelcome sexual advances or requests for sexual activity by a company employee in a position of power or authority to a subordinate officer or employee, or other unwelcome verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature by any company employee when submission to or rejection of such conduct is used as a condition of employment decisions, or the purpose of this conduct is to hinder the work performance of the person being harassed, or creating an intimidating, hostile, or an offensive environment as a result of sexually harassing a company subordinate or any of the client's personnel. Retaliation. The policy forbids retaliation against anyone who makes any accusation of sexual harassment against any company employee. It also forbids retaliation against any employee who assists with the investigation. False sexual harassment allegations do occur. After a thorough and impartial investigation, the sexual harassment accusation is found to be untruthful. The company may discipline the accuser. Regress procedures. Employees of the company who believe that they've been sexually harassed may seek a remedy using the following options. Follow the appropriate procedures written in the company policy manual. Your company policy clearly defines sexual harassment and includes specific examples. A standard definition would be that the behavior need not be directed at a particular person. In other words, telling sexual stories, jokes, lewd gestures, and things like that to a group when a member of the opposite sex is present. If you actually sexually harass someone, don't think that you'll get by with the typical justification used by perpetrators. I didn't do it. I was just kidding around. The person complaining is just too sensitive. That's not what I meant. It wasn't that serious. All of these comments are lame excuses for being offensive. To be sure that you never find yourself in these kinds of situations, be respectful and always consider the person's feelings. Read, understand, and follow your company's policy regarding sexual harassment. If you do this, you'll have no trouble complying to sexual harassment policies and the laws.